So do you want to, is it okay if we do the presentations first?
Oh, okay, yeah. Okay, we're live.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. This is Thursday, May the 11th. It's 4 p.m., and I'd like to call the Environmental Advisory Committee meeting to order. I'd also like to acknowledge that the press and the public have been duly notified of the meeting in accordance with the Freedom of Information Act. The first item on the agenda is the approval of previous meeting minutes, and that was April 13th, 2023. And I wanted to just see if there was anybody who had any corrections or additions to the minutes.
Nope.
Okay, would anybody like to make a motion to approve?
I make a motion to approve the minutes.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
I was absent from the meeting, so I abstain.
Thank you. So the next item on the agenda is citizens' comments, but I wanted to make a motion that we move the citizens' comments into after the presentations. Is that okay? Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second.
Okay. All right. So we have presentations. I'm going to.
You're going to need to call for a vote just to be exact.
Thank you. Sorry. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Okay. Presentations. Doug, do you want to introduce our speakers, or?
I can.
Or-
Jonathan, would you?
Sure, yeah, I can do it. Yeah, that's
We
fine.
Okay.
talked about, I think about 3 months ago, we talked about bringing
Yeah.
the advisory committee up to speed on PFAS, perfluoroalkyl substances. And Jonathan was so kind as to reach out within DHEC and find some of the folks there who are involved in the programs and have expertise in the context of South Carolina. And they were willing to do a presentation for us as part of that education. Anything else to add, Jonathan?
Well, I've worked with both Fran and Sandra over the years, both related to environmental issues, but also during the COVID pandemic. So it was a pleasure to be able to reach out to them to talk about something more in their wheelhouse and PFAS. And so I appreciate them and their willingness to be with us today and bring up to speed. I'm not going to go into great detail about their bios, but I'll just mention that Fran Marshall is the director of the Environmental Public Health at DHEC, and Sandra is a specialist in emerging contaminants. So I'll turn it over to both of them. Go ahead. Thank you both.
Yeah, thank you for joining us.
This is Fran. I was trying to share my screen and it's not letting me. It says I need access, I guess.
We're looking into it.
Thank you. It says host disabled participant screen sharing.
There you go. Yes.
Give it a shot now, Fran.
Okay, here we go. Let's try again. There we go. Thank you.
Let's see.
There it comes.
Coming?
All right. Did we just lose them?
No, that's Fran.
Okay,
That's
so
me. Sorry. Here we go.
Here you go.
There we
great.
go. Okay,
Okay,
sorry
we
about
can-
that. I'm
no,
not
we-
the most technologically.
It's okay.
Here we go. Right. Okay. Can y'all hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
I hear you great.
Okay. We really appreciate the opportunity to be with y'all, and we're going to go through a couple of slides and then leave some time for questions. I'm just going to give a few introductory slides, and then Sandra's going to get down into some details about PFAS. So it's human nature. We all want everything to be black or white, yes or no, right or wrong, safe or unsafe, is or isn't. But with PFAS, it's a lot of shades of gray. You know, the regulatory scheme we have for environmental regulations was designed to address situations like these pictured. And now we're talking about microscopic, concerns in the part per trillion range. And so it's a real challenge for public health worldwide. And just to give you an example, we're dealing with calculated risk. It's very difficult to measure actual risk. And the guidelines for exposure to some of these compounds range from 0.004 parts per trillion up to 100 parts per trillion. So there's 5 orders of magnitude just in the suggested guidelines from various entities. So you can safely say nobody agrees on anything. Chemicals are everywhere. Even hazardous chemicals do good. I worked in a plant one time that made soap, like for personal care products, and you use ethylene oxide as a catalyst in the soap making process. Disposable baby diapers, I think, are, people would say was a great invention, but there's some hazardous chemicals in those, when you go to dispose of them. Even good chemicals can be bad for you in a high enough concentration. Water can kill us. If we eat too many bananas, you can get theoretically to the point where you have too much potassium. So even good things can be bad. The dose makes the poison is the oldest adage in toxicology. So there are, depending on the source you look at, there are either 9,000 or over 12,000 PFAS chemicals. So it's a class of chemicals. And science is changing rapidly. When I first did this slide about a month ago, we could measure 40 of them. Now we can measure 70. There's a new method that says we can measure 70 of these thousands of chemicals. There are exposure guidelines for only 10 of those, and there are proposed standards for 6, but there are no regulatory standards right now in South Carolina for PFAS compounds. And by the way, they're all around us, and their use is beneficial. You'll hear Sandra talk some about that here moving forward. And Sandra, just to save time, if you tell me when to advance the slides, I will.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Fran. So who started all of this? Well, DuPont and 3M discovered the applications of the carbon-fluorine bond in the 1940s. And then they quickly got their patents and began manufacturing. And then they became a common staple in many manufacturing processes. 3M began their phase out of PFOA in 2000, and so DuPont said, "Yay, we'll start making it now." Next slide. So, what are per and polyfluoral alkyl substances? They are very unique chemical compounds because on one side they're water resistant, grease resistant, stain resistant, and then on the other side they're very hydrophilic, like the firefighting foams. They love to spread. Things that are coated with PFOA, like our Teflon cookware and our rain gear, things like that, they are water and oil repellent. So there's a lot of words on this slide. I just wanted y'all to have your own copy so that you can delve into it more if you want. The main thing to remember is chain length. So the long carbon fluorine chain lasts a long time. They are very married to each other. They love carbon and fluorine bonds are very tight, short bonds. It's the strongest bond in chemistry, and that's what has made them so favorable in manufacturing. And then on the other end of the spectrum is that's what's made them dangerous, or thought of as dangerous. They last a long time. Next slide. So this is the basic structure of a 8-carbon fluorine bond, and this could be PFOS, or PFOA, because there's 8 carbons underneath those green balls. Those are the fluorines, and then the red is the head of that particular compound. Next slide. So when did PFAS become a big concern? Well, it had to do in the mid-90s in Parkersburg, West Virginia, If anybody has seen the documentary The Devil We Know or seen the movies Dark Waters, it's about this situation. And so DuPont was the hero in Parkersburg, West Virginia. They had done a lot of great things for that community, building community centers and schools and whatnot. But they also weren't manufacturing and running their processes in a responsible way. They were discharging high concentrations into the surface water. They were burying drums of high concentrations of this. I'm not going to say hazardous chemical because it hasn't been decided that it's a hazardous chemical or anything yet. But they were burying these drums, and the drums would rust, of course, and then percolate down into the groundwater. So it was in their drinking water. Next slide. And where is PFAS? Well, it's everywhere. I mentioned the firefighting foam. This is a Class B firefighting agent. It's not how they put out wildfires and that type of thing. This is just for petroleum fires. It's in our Gore-Tex and our waterproof clothing. It's in our cookware, cosmetics, deemed recently in toilet paper. They have found PFAS compounds in the blood serum of polar bears in the Arctic. It's in pharmaceuticals. It's in electronics. It's even in our dental floss. Next slide.
Latest is even contact lenses.
Yep, all that too. Okay, so we're really proud of this graphic because one of our own DHEC employees created this graphic. And here it tells you where you may find PFAS concentrations in waste or consumer goods or in our homes or on agricultural fields. When everything goes to all of our waste goes to a landfill, and most of the water or a fluid that it goes into a landfill is from rain, and that becomes leachate, and so it goes into the wastewater, biosolids, drinking water, you name it, it's everywhere. But also see this as how complicated this whole PFAS issue is. Next slide. So I mentioned about biosolids. And so what happens through the water treatment program before we can drink clean water, they have to take it from somewhere. And so they usually take it from a surface water source or a groundwater source. And then they go through their disinfection of bacteria and byproducts, and then there's a solid that is formed at the bottom, and it's called sludge, sewage sludge. And that is putting back all the nutrients that back into the soil. It's like you hear of organic farmers. Well, this is another way that you can perform organic gardening, is spreading those biosolids back on agricultural fields, and allowing the nitrogen and the potassium and phosphorus and all that to go back into the fields, and recycling that way. Next slide. Well, then we have the Gailey and Lord facility in Darlington County. And Gailey and Lord it was a textile mill, and they did finished cloth works. And they used PFOA as part of their finishing of the fabrics. Well, we didn't know that at the time that they used PFOA, and some of our site assessment folks were going through offices and stuff. We knew they had an asbestos issue, but we didn't know anything about a water issue. And so they were going through the old files and stuff and found evidence that they had in fact used PFAS compounds in their manufacturing process. So we did, site assessment tested the water on site and did some drilling and and tested the groundwater. And you can see in the picture several different lagoons. They tested those and found very high concentrations of PFAS. And so from that footprint of activity at that particular manufacturing plant, they started stepping out and checking to see which agricultural farms may have received those biosolids. And they found that quite a bit had been used, and many, many acres. And so they tested the groundwater on those farms and found concentrations in their drinking water that was, much, much higher than the 70 parts per trillion of what the EPA had proposed as that current health advisory. So the EPA came in, and you can see there's some filter tanks in the picture. And so the EPA installed whole house filtration units so that these homeowners that lived on agricultural lands used their private well for drinking water, how to filter out the PFAS from their drinking water. Next slide. So why should this concern you? Well, you just need to know. Fran likes to use, we want you to be concerned, but we want you to be the right amount of concern. And so just knowing that, about this issue makes you, knowledge is power. And so even small concentrations may have a negative impact on human health. The main thing is the decreased immune response to vaccines causes high cholesterol, changes in the liver enzymes, testicular cancers, things like that. But when I say small concentrations there, I'm really meaning, very large, higher than the 70 parts per trillion. Remember that the health risks are chronic. This is chronic means over the lifetime. It's not an acute health risk. And when the EPA calculates somebody's risk at 70 parts per trillion, they are assuming that anyone over the age of 6 will drink 2.5 liters of that impacted water per day, 365 days a year for 70 years. And so that is a very conservative calculation. And only 20% of our potential exposure comes from drinking water. So just knowing how you can reduce your exposure by avoiding certain products or things like that. And you can always go to our website, scdhec.gov/PFAS, for more information on how you can reduce your exposure. Next slide. So EPA has proposed drinking water standards for PFOA and PFOS at 4 parts per trillion each. And then this is the first time that the EPA has ever drafted a mixture of any kind of chemical compounds. And they, and those are for 4 PFAS compounds, and I'm not going to name them, but this, I guess, the HI is considered a hazard index, and this is kind of equivalent to a maximum contaminant level, the MCL for PFOA and PFOS. It's, but looking at the calculation below, it sometimes it can be confusing. But these are just proposed drinking water standards. If these concentrations move forward and are finalized by the end of the year, which is what EPA says, then water utilities will have up to 3 years to come into compliance with these concentrations. Next slide. All right, Fran, you want to take that part?
Sure. So there are a lot of potential impacts of the proposals, and one of the biggest things people are talking about nationally right now is controlling the input of these chemicals into sources. because it's going to be cheaper on that end than it is on the end to remove them. There's not a way to destroy PFAS. So it's kind of just, as you saw in the diagram earlier, it's kind of cycling through our environment. So the potential impacts is it could increase water costs by a lot if water utilities have to build millions of dollars worth of filtration systems to try to filter the stuff out. And then the other thing that may be coming is if it is classified, if these class of chemicals are ever classified as hazardous waste or hazardous substances, it impacts the cost of disposing of, say, the charcoal that's been used to absorb PFAS out of the water. So we have to go through the rulemaking process. We don't know yet what's going to be the final rule. EPA is currently accepting comments on their proposals, and they do have to address the comments they receive, so the numbers may change. So we just all are in a position where we have to stay tuned. And the last thing I wanted to mention, I wanted just to say one thing. Sandra was talking about being concerned. We want people to be informed, not concerned. So we, like she said, knowledge is power. We want people to know as much as we know about this. It is a lot of gray, a lot of uncertainty. With that, we'd be glad to take any questions y'all have.
I have two questions for you guys, and I guess the first one really is, as an environmental advisory group for the Isle of Palms, what role do you see us playing here?
Well, I think, we need all the help we can get to help educate folks. There's some good material on the webpage. Mm-hmm. There are also some other, EPA has some good material out there, just helping people understand what these chemicals are. We didn't get to this point overnight, and we're not going to get rid of them. It's not going to be there's no quick solution to this problem. And, some things, people like to have Scotch Guard or, chemicals sprayed on their couches to prevent them from staining, or on carpets. People like I like wrinkle-free clothes as much as the next person. So at some point, it's like we make a decision about our own risk, but there are also ways to reduce what's going into the environment. So there's a really good one-page on our website about that. So I think if y'all can help us kind of just educate people. Again, we don't want to scare people. We don't want them to be, afraid, because we don't think about it consciously, but we're surrounded by chemicals all the time. And this is just another class of chemicals that has the attention and the focus of a lot of regulatory activity at the moment.
And the second question I had was, I saw, I guess this came out a couple of months ago about the 4 parts per million. Trillion, 4 parts per trillion.
Right.
And I happened to run into someone who worked with the Isle of Palms water and sewer department. And he had just recently attended, I guess, a presentation and was educated about the changes and all that. And he said that even though these are high standards or really strict standards, that we are fairly close to that number already. Do you know anything about that?
Doug had the number.
Yeah, we had some water quality data. We had some water quality data come in. I think it was around 4 or 5. So the water we're getting from Charleston is very close to what the current level is.
Yeah, in the last 5 years, the PFOA has been around 4.1 to 5.3, and PFOS was 5.4 to 9.7. Yeah. That was the range.
Yeah.
So
I thought that was positive. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it is.
It is.
Yeah, okay. Jonathan?
Hey, Fran, Sandra, that was great. I wanted to ask you, I know in a separate email you had mentioned to me before that there was potentially some funding that people could access to test their private wells for some of these chemicals. Do you have any idea, or I don't know if we would have a baseline sense of like how much might be in well waters across the state. I don't know if you've already been getting results like that. And I'm also not sure how many homes on the island are using their well water as a drinking source versus well water to irrigate their lawn. I don't know if those numbers are very high.
I don't believe so. I think they're, if not all, pretty much all just irrigation. For irrigation, but we could check that.
Okay.
Yeah, the other thing that's going on behind the drinking water standards is what they call the unregulated contaminant monitoring rule, UCMR 5. And in the UCMR 5, they're monitoring over the next 3 years 28 or 29 additional PFAS compounds. So there is a monitoring program that's going along. So maybe, Fran, within the context of Jonathan's question, what, has DHEC gotten involved now, and have they determined who you're going to be sampling under the UCMR5 and all those activities?
So UCRM5 is being run, by the EPA, and they select the systems that are sampled. But if you look on our website, the Bureau of Water, if you search PFAS, DHEC PFAS Bureau of Water, they have implemented some sampling strategies across the state. They've done ambient surface water sampling. They've sampled at the large and small drinking water providers, and they're implementing now, and we're working with some other funding as well to start doing some private well sampling. We don't actually regulate private wells. We regulate we permit the building or the installation of the well, and then it's really up to the well owner to maintain the well and, to do all that. But we do have quite a bit of funding right now to go out and sample those private wells. We have been doing that now for a few months. We still have a long ways to go. The data is from the Bureau of Water Strategies is posted on our web pages as soon as it's available, and they've done it seasonally. So they wanted to get 4 quarters worth of data. I think the first 2 quarters are up, and the third one either is just up or will be soon on the ambient water side.
This might be a bit of an
We're
ignorant.
Gathering data for sure.
So,
So
John,
I put in the chat 3 links. One of them is to the DHEC PFAS page. And then the second link is where if you have a drinking water well, and I mean drinking water well, not an irrigation well, then I put in the link where you can go online and request your well to be sampled by DHEC. And then the third link is for the Bureau of Water page. And when you go to the Bureau of Water page, you'll see on the right-hand side, downloads and links, and it'll take you to the ambient surface water data and the drinking water sampling results.
So we were fortunate in South Carolina not to have a major point source like North Carolina had with the Chemours facility in Wilmington. We are finding it, when you're looking at something at such looking for something at such low concentrations, you tend to find it, some of it.
Can I?
So, it is in a lot of different consumer products. It's in a lot of different food products. Your Chinese food boxes. I don't want that grease getting on my car seat either. But the boxes do have PFAS in them. So
pizza boxes, the wax paper.
There's a lot of work to do collectively across a lot of different regulatory entities, and just with the public in general. I think. People if you have a choice between buying now a pan that's Teflon or a pan that's, made out of some other material, I think some people are choosing the other material.
Can I ask Fran and follow up? And Sandra, you might not be able to answer part of this question, but related to the wells and looking at some of the sources of PFAS and ways to reduce your risk, I was looking at the website, and it talks about fish and contamination of fish. And, being on the coast here, we're talking about different tests we might want to do of our intercoastal waterway, because there are coliform bacteria and whatnot. But is it possible that well water, even if it's for irrigation, could be getting into our surface water or groundwater and going into the waterways where the fish are? And would that then be a reasonable thing to still test, sample, even if the well water is just for irrigation, not for drinking per se? How do we, I don't know how to frame the question exactly.
You're framing it well, Jonathan.
I don't know if you understand what I'm trying to get at, but.
That's a good question. Yeah, our environment is connected in a lot of different ways, and that's a very good question. So what they've done with the ambient monitoring around the state, and that includes some of the brackish waters along the coast, the ambient monitoring, if they find a spot where they're seeing a higher number, then they're looking for potential sources. They kind of do a little small study on that particular area. They also are starting to collect some data in fish. We don't have enough data yet to make any kind of decisions about that. We have a long-standing fish program for mercury and PCBs, but we have not don't have enough data yet to talk about advisories from PFAS. We also are sampling some blue crabs and oysters, and the preliminary results of those don't look like it's much of a problem, but again, we don't have enough data to really make any, big determinations just yet. So we are looking at that kind of thing. I hear your thought about the irrigation wells. And if we knew of an irrigation well that was next to a known source of PFAS, we would be more likely to expend the funds to sample that.
Okay, sure.
Just doing it out of, kind of random, if it's not near a known source or we don't have a high surface number, we probably would move to the next, we have to kind of prioritize our sampling, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But certainly we look at any kind of well, if they're monitoring wells around the facility where we know we have a source, we'll collect samples from those as well. So we're focused on drinking water, but we certainly look at other opportunities to find, to identify potential sources and hopefully to remove the source. That getting rid of the source on the front end, again, is the best and cheapest way to resolve this problem in the long haul.
Yeah, if you look on the Isle of Palms and you think about where are the risks, you've got the water coming in from Charleston is a controlled point coming in, so we can do that. The bigger risk in Isle of Palms right now is the individual use of PFAS materials in the home, PFAS Teflon. All these things are going into the septic systems, which we were going to talk about.
I'm having a hard time hearing.
This is Doug Hattler. I was saying in Isle of Palms, I think our biggest risk points are not so much the water coming in from Charleston, but it's really the home use of PFAS substances that are going to be either going directly into septics. We still have a large number of septics here on the island. And then that water is also going to be going into whoever's connected to the sewer is going to the sewer and water. So then the issue is, what's our effluent concentrations of PFAS going out into our receiving streams and our biosolids? One of the things that's a big struggle right now is with biosolids is they are a source because there's PFAS. The longer chains are going to bind to the organic material on the biosolids. So if you'll continue to land apply them, which I was at the South Carolina Residuals and Biosolids Conference about 3 months ago, and 72% of all the biosolids in how they're managed in South Carolina is land application, which means we're contaminating the land. If we continue to create, but it's complicated because we haven't done a risk assessment on biosolids yet. And we have the one case that was just presented about Darlington where we know, biosolids can contaminate land. So this constant, when you think about it, it's the PFAS cycle, but that PFAS cycle really represents how PFAS moves through the hydrologic cycle. So the idea is source control is the most important thing. So things like programs maybe where we have people trade in their PFAS things, stop using PFAS, getting us all off septics. I mean, this is something that is a very big controversial because of the expense, but getting people off septics and then being able to funnel risk and liability through the wastewater treatment plant and looking at how do we manage that through the water and wastewater treatment plant. The next couple of years, and I'm going to turn this into a question now, Fran and Sandra. I think what we're hearing, and I was just with a destruction technology company. We're using supercritical water oxidation. There's electrochemical. The big issue right now is going to be how serious is this? Everyone's got PFAS in their blood. It's a chronic exposure. How fast do we really need to move? And, drinking water is one source, but the bigger source is the direct exposure people have to PFAS through the things they're using in their home and the things they're wearing on their clothes. So there's going to be a lot of monitoring and debate going on over the next couple of years. There will be some forward-looking utilities and municipalities and other entities that will be starting to move to removal and destruction and all that. But in a place like Isle of Palms, this is a lot of in my opinion, I'd like to hear from Sandra and but we have to collect some data and really understand if that risk and impact exists, and then from there we would craft our recommendations to the town council, the city committee. But it's a very, as Fran said, it's a complicated issue. It's not like DDT and dioxin where there was limited uses in some respects. PFAS is ubiquitous. It's everywhere. And we're just really learning about it. And there's more than 9,000 species. We only know how to measure what did you say, 70 species we know how to measure at best, if that?
Question.
But the important thing was, we need to be aware of this because this is going to be something that is going to affect every community where you have community water systems and wastewater systems under NPDES permits.
How effective are the whole house filters at filtering
So
the PFAS
just like
out
with
of?
any kind of filters, it depends on the concentration going through them. So part of having a whole house filter is there are usually 2 filters in sequence. So they're tests done periodically to see if you have breakthrough from the first filter into the second filter. So it really depends. A lot of people are using the point of use filters, and again, that same kind of thing. You gotta be careful not to use it forever. It's like, you know, if you have one of those coffee pots that has little filters in it, you got to change it every now and then. You know,
Okay. All right, thank you.
thinking the name of them. But anyway, the point of use filters just go on your kitchen sink, and they reduce the amount of PFAS. They don't eliminate it all the way, unless there are maybe some that are starting to be marketed that talk about they're certified for PFAS. But typical filters like Brita and some others that have been on the market a while don't have that certification, but they could definitely reduce organics in your water, and certainly would reduce PFAS as well.
But the thing to recognize is when we call those separation technologies. The separation technology is going to absorb the PFAS. Then you can throw it in the garbage. It's going to the landfill, and now you got the PFAS
Right.
going into the landfill leachate.
Right.
And then we got to deal with the
Right,
landfill
that's the
leachate.
problem. It doesn't destroy them. It's just concentrating them really and putting them in the landfill where they get back into that cycle.
So, you know, there's the environmental aspect of this and the continuous spread, but there's the health impact of it, and it's 2 very complicated issues.
Can I ask one more question, just to help us maybe move forward, Fran and Sandra? If we're looking at maybe doing some testing, would it make sense to measure, you know, water going off the back of our island through the what they call them, outfalls? What might be getting into our intercoastal waterway, or you know, I know you mentioned this fish testing program. I'm just trying to think, you know, if we want to have a better understanding, gain some knowledge, right? Knowledge is power. You know, maybe we'll have a baseline. We know where things might go. Is there either testing you'd recommend through, you know, DHEC or a private vendor of certain tests we could potentially do? I'm just trying to. I don't want us to expend resources unnecessarily, but
Sure.
just gain some better understanding of what might be out there here on the island.
What I would recommend is that we can put you in touch with some of our folks in the Bureau of Water who've been doing a lot of the sampling statewide. They would probably have they'd be better equipped to give you some advice on that, and we'd be happy to get you in touch with those folks.
So, and also I'll put the link in the chat on the GIS page that has the results of all the surface water data. And Dr. Matt Ballman is the man in charge, and I'm going to put his.
Yeah, that's exactly who I would send you to.
Yeah, I'll put his contact information in the chat as well.
And we'll let him know to expect a call from y'all if you'd like for us to.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Sure.
Fran and Sandra, thank you so much. Really very helpful. Like we said, our goal initially is education and bringing the committee up to speed. And next is, you know, do we need to take any action? What is it, and what guidance do we continue to need from DHEC?
So
We
I
appreciate that.
just wanted to say thank you, but also just, you know, I just heard that the American Cancer Society now says that 1 in 2 people now, 50% of us are going to encounter cancer at some point in our lives, and you know, and that's just living. That's not you know, because of PFAS. That's because of everything that's in our environment today, and genetics, and you know, all the things that play into it. So anyway, thank you for having us today.
Thank you.
I guess one last question too. Are there other communities like us that are inquiring and asking for presentations?
Y'all are the first one that I've been asked to speak with, and the water guys may have done a little bit more, but I think you're very progressive in that regard, and I applaud your efforts to educate yourselves so that you can educate your constituents.
Absolutely. But it sounds like y'all know who Doug Kindred is. I thought I heard his name mentioned amongst y'all talking. Or did I dream it?
No, that was Doug Hattler, who.
Different Doug.
Different
Okay,
Doug.
never mind.
But I have met some of the folks. I don't know if I know Doug Kinder, did you say? Kinder?
Yeah, Doug Keinert is over drinking water at DHEC. Matt Ballman is the fellow that I think would be best to assist you with any kind of sampling strategy or to explain the strategies they've employed and how they may have already taken some samples in your area of both water, fish, crabs, and
Matt's in
other
the,
things.
Did you say Keinert?
I think so. Matt's in the toxicology, right? He's in your group? He's in the health group? I think I've met Matt.
No, he's in the Bureau of Water.
He is in Bureau of Water,
Yeah,
okay.
he just did a media briefing, our third media briefing, and he presented his surface water program.
I think it's, I think the chairperson
Yes.
is telling us as we need to move on.
Yes,
Stay-
thank you both so much. It's been very informative. I really appreciate it.
Let us know if any additional questions come up that we can help with. Thank
Okay.
y'all and have a great day.
Okay,
Thank you
we
for your
will.
time.
Thank
We
you.
appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Elizabeth, I know that you wanted to give us a brief update about the recycling, the glass recycling. Did you want to go next?
So, and I would just preface Elizabeth coming up by saying the group, and it's now been maybe 3 meetings ago, we talked about just checking in kind of periodically with both of our pilot programs, the glass recycling, which Elizabeth is here for, and the composting. So I asked her to come just as, give way for an update as to how it's going, general kind of observations and question and answers that you all might have. So thank you for being here, Elizabeth.
You're very welcome. Thank you for all the support.
Yes.
You can. I want to thank you also for the wood enclosures over here at Carmen Bunch. They look fantastic, and I think it's a great, attractive setting and is motivation for residents as well. So far, I was able to get some numbers. It's 20,000 pounds, so that's pretty impressive.
10 tons.
And it keeps growing. So I am asking the drivers when they come out on Mondays, how was it to this week? And it's always clean. It's always just glass, which is great. People are very aware and cognizant of what they bring and purposeful, so that's wonderful. It's increasing every week. We've got 4 cans at each location. The ones at the marina are still in the same spot, although I think one of them, I think the area's been shifted around. They're doing something by the fire station. But they're still there, and recently I've met with Susan Smith and Chandra with the city about getting just more of a strategy in place of marketing. We've added a City of Isle of Palms logo to our website. We have a whole page of Find a Drop-Off drop-down where it features the Isle of Palms and what has been happening here and what you've done. We are also, as Fisher Recycling, going to attend the farmers markets in the summer, and we've got a booth at the Hurricane Expo to spread the word.
Great.
And I've also met with the Island Eye News for an article and investing in some advertising for the paper to also bring awareness. I've learned that not everyone's on social media, so I'm not reaching everyone that I want to reach. And that campaign is still underway with several of the social media outlets. The paper, the press release is coming out. We finally finalized it. Chandra helped us with, and Sandra, you helped us with the quote for that. So it is finalized, and I'm going to work on that tomorrow. That's my goal. So it's been going very well, and I think that this momentum of me getting back on social media and being in the paper as well, and the press release will create some momentum. And May is also, my personal goal is to reach out to the rental companies to just get word out to them that they have options for glass recycling.
That's great.
I have a question. We had recently, I guess we had the paper shredding collection day. Would there be any advantage to maybe having a glass recycling day and advertise it that would create, the more awareness?
I mean, I think the more awareness, the better, for sure. I mean, we could participate in that.
I would just
I'm
hate
just
for people to think
curious.
there's just one opportunity rather than it's an ongoing.
Yeah, I was just
thing.
thinking, you have it and people can drop it, we advertise it as such, but then use it as a way to get a lot of people to know that we actually have an ongoing program. And I don't know, I'm just trying to
Sure.
brainstorm a little bit.
And I'm hoping I think the Hurricane Expo is first, and then the farmers markets are next, but I do plan on promoting that we'll be there, that you're welcome to bring your glass, but it's also about creating awareness, and I'll have some sort of fun activity to
We
do.
could maybe do something around the 4th of July. There will be a lot of bottles of beer that are being
Yeah.
drank that weekend. Honestly, I mean, just saying like after, just drop it off at the glass recycling.
Yeah,
And-
just put
Yeah.
an ad in the eye or let
Yeah.
people know. The other thing too is, I know we hate signs, but, it could be like at the supermarket or over at the liquor store, put a sign that says, hey, if you would your bottles, take them here when you're done.
Yeah, I mean, I think either at the supermarket itself or maybe just like closer to the road so people driving by can see, oh, here is a place I can drop off my recycling for glass and food stuff.
The 10 tons is pretty good.
It's very good. It's very good.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank
We
you.
appreciate it.
Appreciate your help.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
So next, I'd like to move on to citizen comments, and thank you guys for being so patient.
Hi, good to see you all again. Susan Smith, co-founder of Isle of Palms Cleanup Crew and a resident of Isle of Palms. Wanted to thank you for embracing the fill-a-bag concept. I know you talked about it, I think, at your last meeting, and Sandra filled me in, and I also went back and listened to the meeting. Just a couple of things. I also wanted to, hopefully, we're also embracing the toy bin concept, and I think you could place those probably at almost all or all of the places that you are talking about putting in fill-a-bag stations. And I think that that would also be really positively received and helpful. I'm not sure exactly what you want to do with the captains, the neighborhood captains, in relation to fill-a-bag and the toy bins, whether the city might be monitoring those. But I think that captains could potentially be helpful just to keep an eye on both of those things to make sure that we're not missing buckets or things aren't getting gross or people aren't using them improperly and putting trash and leaving that in there. And it also occurred to me that we do have an issue when bad weather comes up or high tides come up, sometimes with the trash cans being compromised and being spilled over. Sometimes it's something you can plan for, and sometimes it's not. If you have a really bad thunderstorm, we've had that happen before, roll through with big winds, that maybe this neighborhood captain network could be a group that the city could reach out to check on beach trash cans to make sure that they're not rolling around and rolling into the ocean even in those cases. So, also, as far as, I think there's going to be some things that we might need to look at in terms of placement and that kind of thing. But I am hoping, in terms of where those things are placed in relation to the beach access path. But I am hoping that we can speed it along to some degree to get it done before the season really heats up. As far as the places that you were talking about, they all sounded great. I just wanted to add that the county park is a location that I'm hoping to pitch to them to have that on their premises, the same fill-a-bag and a toy bin, and have reached out to them but have not heard back. I think you were looking at maybe 55th and 57th. I would think you would probably just need to pick one of those, but and wanted to note that Wild Dunes actually does have a take a toy, leave a toy bin that was part of what inspired our toy bin at Front Beach at 11th. Otherwise, I wanted to introduce, and I wanted to see, too, one question in my mind is with the toy bins is dimensions and whether we need to adjust those. We have at Front Beach, we have a bin that is 2.5 feet by 4 feet by 21 inches high, and that may be a little bigger than what you want to do other places, but that is just repurposed crates that a resident, her husband had from his workplace. So they just made that, repurposed it. And we could maybe look at other packaging that he has at his workplace that might be smaller. But and I wanted to introduce Natasha, who really is the person who brought the fill-a-bag concept to Isle of Palms. So I will let her take over.
Hi, everyone. How are you?
Good.
I will respect your time and be brief. I'm Natasha Viswanathan. I'm a realtor and I am a resident of Mount Pleasant, but I consider Isle of Palms my local beach. I'm a native of Hilton Head Island and I grew up loving our ecosystem, and it's really important that I maintain it because it's my home. Also, it's my livelihood as a real estate agent. So I saw Fill-A-Bag in Key Biscayne, Florida. Manny Rionda is the founder of the organization, and it's a really simple concept. You help empower the public to create a meaningful cleanup from what would be an ordinary beach walk. So I brought Fill-A-Bag to Station 10 on Sullivan's Island and then to Front Beach. And they're the first stations that have been deployed in the state of South Carolina. So really great news for us here on the island, but I would love to answer any questions that you have. Are you familiar with the concept? Okay, great.
Yeah, thank you.
Do you have questions about it?
So
I thought it was Station 12.
On Sullivan's?
Yeah.
It might be Station 12,
Yeah,
right
the
across
road
from,
that goes all the way out. That's where I saw it, I thought,
right across from the fort.
because nobody can park at 10.
Okay, 12.
Yeah.
Yep, that's my fault.
So Natasha, I would just ask that this group has identified maybe 5 different locations. And how would that work? Would the stations themselves be donated and then the city be responsible for servicing and maintaining those? Or walk us through what that process would be.
Great question. So the general premise of the Fill-A-Bag organization is more of a grassroots approach. So concerned citizens would purchase the post, paint the post, install the post, and then Fill-A-Bag will, with their own budget and funding, supply the hooks. It's a special type of hook that keeps the buckets from blowing off, and then branding. So they're pretty specific about the branding and the QR code that goes on the top so that people can check in and share on social their cleanup. So I'm happy to connect you with Manny. I think it would just be a conversation of what makes the most sense for you, but deploying on a large level, you would definitely want some sort of oversight so that the buckets are maintained and cleaned out and the trash is making it into the appropriate receptacle.
So are you doing that for the two that are here now?
Yes.
Or, okay.
Yep.
So we would be kind of looking for a sponsor at each of those. Is that how you would envision it?
That's
a person
exactly
would
right. Yep.
buy it, sponsor it. I mean, there would be an adjacent city can that our staff handles the yellow cans that you're aware
Yep.
of. And I guess that's the way that would work.
Yeah,
We kind of
and I
make them
think-
available. People would individually adopt them and take it from there to some degree.
That's the question that we need to solve. So I also think that being on the beach versus off the beach a little bit, like we have at Station 12 and Front Beach, we run the risk of the posts not staying in the ground. So that might be a question for you all. Could a citizen quickcrete something into the beach? Is that even allowed? So I think that there needs to be a bigger conversation on how you want them installed and who is going to be responsible for that.
Is there a reason not to have it earlier in the path?
I think it's nice to have it earlier in the path, but it needs to be next to a receptacle.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be the cans are beachside, and I think they kind of have to be serviced.
Right.
And I think you're saying that the post would really need to be near the can.
Right. To be utilized.
What about, this pop-up kind of freak 70-mile-an-hour winds last week? What happened, like, in your experience? Did those things fly away?
If we lose them, it's to theft. I drill holes in the bottom to drain rainwater and to prevent theft. And the smaller buckets actually are lasting longer than the big 5 gallons. They stay on with those kind of like C hooks almost. You really have to kind of bend them up to get them off the hook. So I think, you know, we can only mitigate theft so much. I don't know who wants a bucket with holes in it, but it could be a hot commodity. I just refilled the station today, and there were a few buckets missing, but it's been a while since I've refilled it. So I think it's not as prevalent of an issue, but it is something that we have to consider, you know, storms and theft.
Okay.
Any other questions for Natasha? Okay, thank you so much.
Well, actually,
Oh,
just
sorry.
real quick, would there be any methodology aside from Quikrete that you can think of to get the posts to stay near the trash cans on the beach side?
If you just, I mean, if you maybe get a longer post and dig it in really,
Go deeper.
yeah. But I just don't trust like an ordinary citizen with that. I can barely use a post hole digger myself, so I had to get some support, but you know, those are things we can overcome. I think the bigger conversation is who is going to purchase the posts, who is going to paint them, and deploy them, and then fill a bag can handle the hooks, the branding. That person, the citizen would also have to handle the bucket purchase, unless that's something that you all would like to take on.
How much does that cost?
The buckets? $4 a piece.
Okay.
Yeah.
I can, you know, from the city's perspective, I don't see the funding as being a problem. I see the management
Management, yeah.
of them. I mean,
Yeah.
we just don't have, and it's, you know, the public works staff in the summer, they're, you know, they're just not, they're busy. So I guess I would foresee it being something that maybe each of these identified areas would have a local resident, you know, we kind of make it somehow available to them and kind of aware as a pre-approved location and available for adoption or
Sponsorship.
Sponsorship.
Someone could have their name on the bottom. Sure, every realtor in town would want that. There are ways to get creative with it, absolutely, but when you create the resource for people to educate themselves and to do something meaningful, even just when they're on the beach, I think it has a huge impact. So I love that you're considering doing it.
Yeah,
Happy to connect you with Manny, and happy to also take on some responsibility, however that looks for you.
That's great.
And maybe an alternative to individual citizens adopting them would be local groups, community groups, clubs, maybe adopting. I can see
Chamber
that.
of Commerce.
Yeah.
Kind of like OCRM did the Adopt a Path program, so it could be kind of a similar thing where you, I don't think they do it anymore, but.
The neighborhood captain concept that you were talking about for drains could fold in this.
Right.
Or, you know, be applied to this.
Mhm.
And also maybe give some leeway that that person could maybe do a neighborhood beach sweep on the, you know, that kind of thing as well. But I think it could establish a nice network that could serve some other purposes for you.
Mm.
Like I mentioned, with keeping an eye on it just on the trash cans too. The yellow beach trash cans.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you so much. All right. Okay. So, Elizabeth, if you don't have to stay through the business section of the meeting if you
That's the
don't want to.
exciting part.
But you're welcome to stay if you'd like. Yeah. Okay, so why don't we go ahead and proceed with old business? Because I know we've had, we've postponed the discussions about water quality and climate action in particular a couple of times. So I don't know how you guys are doing for time, Nicole? Because we're at 5 o'clock now. You guys okay for a little bit?
Yes. I know Jordan's got a hard stop coming up.
Yeah.
I don't know, you got,
I can stay for probably like 10, 15 more minutes.
okay.
Okay, so why don't we go ahead and get started, and we'll see how far we can work through the old business. Is that okay with everybody?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so we have water quality first.
So who's going to nominate Jonathan to talk?
Second.
Yeah, Jonathan, so the group, and I don't know that we've we may not have met other than just kind of virtually exchanged emails, but.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, we're still making progress, I think, on what our goals are, which is essentially we're trying to get a baseline understanding of what the water quality is on the island. So I don't think that goal has really changed. So maybe the updated goal is to have a plan of action by the end of the calendar year to figure out, between talking to all these different parties we talk to, from Charleston waterkeepers to people that look at fish at DHEC to people that look at PFAS at DHEC, to really figure out how do we go about doing this. I'm not an expert in water. I'm not an expert in water testing. So it's trying to figure out what do we try to think we can do on our own versus hire somebody else out to do it. So I feel like we're making baby steps, but it's conversation after conversation with this person telling us to talk to that person. So I think as far as just kind of the general water quality on the island and what's happening in the Intracoastal Waterway, and possibly testing of retention ponds and wild dunes for contaminants and potential algal blooms. I mean, we're getting there. I just don't think we're there yet. So that's still, I think, one of our priorities I think we need to have by the end of the year.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I agree. I agree with you. I mean, that was part of what we talked about, was establishing a baseline, and from the baseline determining on an action plan. I've had some changes personally, so I have more time available. I have done a lot of water testing. I have done a lot of these types of programs, so I think I can commit myself a little bit more to it. So I think what might be helpful is maybe if we can get one meeting together and just kind of summarize, even if it's summarize where we're at and what we need to do to get to where we want to go. And then we can start taking more specific action. I think part of the challenge is everybody's got full-time jobs, everybody's busy, we talk about, but we haven't really sat down and said, okay, here's what we've learned, what do we want to do with it? I think if we can do that.
Douglas, are you have y'all done any more water testing?
No.
No.
No, we haven't, and we've talked about, the nature of the water testing that's out there, that DHEC is already doing water testing. And I guess questions have come up as to whether or not we should continue, if that should be a strategy. And I guess I would kind of characterize these questions about water quality very much, kind of the PFAS description. It really makes you, it's so complex, a little bit overwhelming. You kind of, drill down on one aspect of it, but it makes you scratch your head about the other aspect. So it's a very complex,
I
it's
think
not
there's four basic elements. We got the water coming in the island from Charleston. We've got the way we're using that water in the homes and the businesses, and then how it's being disposed of, and then surface water runoff. I think those are the four key things we need to understand and look at. And I think if you look at the water coming from Charleston, it's coming into a single point, so it gets down to, are they in compliance with the local, with the requirements? PFAS is going to come up there. I think when you talk about surface water runoff, it gets into the drainage plans and the things that we're doing, but understanding the quality of that. I think when we get into wastewater disposal, we have the Water and Sewer Authority. They pull samples, we can get that data. What we don't know, and this is the big thing we wanted to talk about, what I don't think we're going to have time, is septic. It's a common thing. Nobody wants to pay for people to go onto the sewer, but we've got an underutilized sewer plant, and we've got people still on septic. The committee and the water and sewer, I think there should be a program where we help finance people to move on to the water and, to the sewers. And nobody ever wants to do it. It's chronic around the entire United States. I've seen it in many communities I've lived in. But, that's one of the things I think we need to examine, whether we want to make a recommendation to that level. And then, so I think we know the avenues. It's just a matter of who's got the data and what we need to do with it. The most complex issue is going to be, the individual waste disposal systems, the septic systems, and the drainage, because those are the things that are most common that there isn't a permit or regulation that we could fall on. Like with Charleston giving us water, you've got the Clean Safe Drinking Water Act. With the Water and Sewer Authority going out, we've got the Clean Water Act. But the surface water runoff internally, and then the septic, we don't have any regulations, there's no requirement, so it comes down to what we want to do as a city in those areas.
I want to just lift up something real quick. The South Carolina Environmental Law Project has filed a preliminary injunction in their coastal septic management case. requesting that DHEC does not issue any more septic tank permits along the coast that are part of a larger common plan of development or within 200 feet of the water of the state. So one question I guess I have is this something that can be done on the local level? Like if we were to look at that seriously as something that we locally adopted, is that something that has any viability? Is that something to consider?
Yeah, Douglas, you've been here the longest. I mean,
Yeah, so-
what's this discussion? How's it gone before?
So the city has, over time, passed more restrictive regulations than what the state has as they pertain to septic systems. Belvin, read, so one of them was to not be within 200 feet of.
It says the water of the state, and I can't define that, unfortunately.
Yeah, okay. So that would be that would be a critical line along the marsh, and then as we know, those critical lines come up through the ditches, and we would need DHEC, and this has caused us a little bit of kind of issue. Their inconsistency with, like 25th, the state waters came all the way to Waterway and then
That's the
stopped
challenge.
in other ditches. So we get them individually kind of characterized. So the ditches would be a problem. But what was the other part of that? The first part was.
Well, and Douglas, to your point, there's been a lot of debate in Washington about what are waters of the United States. The Clean Water Act and most of the regulations around what they call navigable waterways. But I haven't looked into South Carolina, so we can look a little bit deeper into that.
Yeah, they just come out and put flags. They literally.
Yeah, I mean,
staff
what do
guys
they
say,
consider
"This is on."
navigable? I mean, under the Obama administration, what they're trying to push out was it could be swales. Other definitions through the federal government were no, it's rivers, streams, rivulets.
Douglas, to answer your question, a larger common plan of development.
So that I think that's not going to happen. I mean, that there will not be any future subdivision tied to septic systems. So that part is pretty well covered in our existing code. That's part of our subdivision regulations that you couldn't do that.
Okay.
But the provision of prohibiting a septic system within 200 feet of, we would probably just say critical line.
Sure.
Is how we would define that. We could do, but I think it would be tricky if the critical line is defined as going up into the ditches, which DHEC has in certain instances. They have declared that. So it would be administratively tricky, and of course.
But Douglas, what's the appetite for the city and the Water and Sewage Authority work together and float a bond, and then give people the opportunity to low finance? It's $40,000 to connect this source system. It's ridiculous. There's no standards. There's no blueprints. Everyone is done individually as a one-off, and it's very expensive to the homeowner. What a lot of communities do is they'll float a bond, and they'll offer low-interest options for people to connect. I mean, what's the appetite for something like that?
So that issue has been pretty drilled down onto,
I
and
figured. I'm just curious.
there is a master plan. The city and the Water and Sewer Commission came together, financed a master plan of how it would be done. They've developed cost estimates. I think they were in the range of, I think it was approaching $50 million. The cost per unit, we could figure that out. But at the end of the day, it is a very expensive cost per unit to do. And the bond, the only way you can get a bond is if the city were to enact a mandatory tie-in requirement that basically ensures that the bond will get repaid.
And what's the appetite for that from previous?
And that's always been where it falls apart.
Yeah, and
That
and
the
when-
mandatory tie-in is an emotional thing that council's not willing to do, or historically hasn't been willing to do. And I guess especially, and from my perspective, the argument or the impetus to do that gets eroded when information gets out that even if everything was on a sewer system, we would still have water with bacteria making its way out into the ditches, out into the waterways, because so much of it is animal and outside of our control. So that's kind of
this is where the PFAS thing comes into play, because if we go out and start doing a sampling plan, we look at the water coming in, we go out and randomly sample some of the septic systems, some of the ditches, we start identifying that the septic systems are sources of PFAS into the groundwater. Now you have you might have a potential driver.
I would
for making
also
something.
argue that with sea level rise, there's sort of a ticking time bomb aspect.
Well,
to
yeah,
systems
climate
out there.
adaptation, but we already know the city doesn't have an appetite for getting into the climate business. We've tried statement there.
Well, I think there's sea level rise, like purely focusing on sea level rise. I think there's
Yeah, I mean,
perhaps. I mean, I understand it is a contentious issue in Isle Palms that there's a long history on this very
Right.
issue, but it does seem like a productive area to be pushing in. And also, there's some leadership aspect to this. This is going to be an issue all across the Low Country, septic issues. So if we can model, a good path forward when it seems very tricky.
Yeah, and it's not just here. I mean, I was working with the city of Saco up in Maine, and they're going to spend, I don't know, I forget, $47 million to lift their entire wastewater treatment plant to 5 feet because of the river rises. So there's precedent. The other thing is with the Water and Sewer Commission, I wonder if we can talk with them about, could this program be eligible for Clean Water Act state revolving fund money? There's hundreds of millions of dollars. There's millions of dollars that have been through the Infrastructure Act and the latest bilateral Infrastructure Act and the Inflation Reduction Act. There's been a ton of more money. There's been a lot more money put into the state revolving fund money. So I don't know if there's any way we can get access to that too.
They were just successful in getting a grant to, and I can't remember the amount, but to extend the sewer. And I would say that, the city council and the Water and Sewer Commission has been willing and wanting to extend it. It's just the money that it costs is where it falls apart. And there has been this.
This is a good time to look into
I think we've got a
available
good,
money.
yeah, I think we probably should have more discussion as a
Yeah, I
work
think
group
we're
about it, but I think it
already
gives you
over.
flavor of how we get on these rabbit holes. So
Yeah.
we'll come back.
So again, as part of the objectives, I think we're almost there. I think we've got 3 or 4 of the major objectives. We're looking at the data that's available. I think we can get together offline before the next meeting or when they're available. Just kind of summarize it, get it into an actionable thing. I think we'll be in good
Yeah, let's
shape.
make a scheduling poll.
Yeah,
and set
Johnny,
something up.
Jonathan, you've done a good job of carrying the torch because, this is something we all started together, but I now have more time to commit to it.
If you could guess a percentage of the island that has access to the current sewer system.
That's currently tied in. I think, so all of Wild Dunes is tied in, and I think when you're outside of Wild Dunes, I think it's half of what's outside of Wild Dunes. I believe it's 1,400 units that are not tied in out of about 4,500 units. So I think
That's
it's,
either direct access or grinder pump.
yes,
Okay.
I think there's 1,400 units that are on septic systems. But we have that number down to the, down to the one.
To be
And is it
interesting. Yeah,
primarily because they don't have access or
Access
they
is
choose-
expensive. I mean, you could get access to them, but it's just very expensive.
I went down, we have a septic, and we went down, I very quickly talked to the Water and Sewer Authority, and I said, I've heard it's 25,000. They said, no, it's up toward probably more closer to $45,000 to get yourself connected.
That's ridiculous.
And I asked them, I said, well, do you have a standard blueprint and standard plan? Do you have a standard engineer you work with? And there's even no standardized program. You would think that they would have just a set of blueprints that you could just take and adapt, but you're all on your own if you want to do this. My wife and I were probably going to wind up doing it, but,
Well, that's quite a hurdle
Yeah,
Yeah,
it is. It's
yeah.
expensive.
when addressing this.
I think there's multiple ways to approach it. One is, are there ways to reduce the cost by coming up with standard approaches, could we find money? But I think this should be one of our objectives to really look at this. Let's
I agree.
summarize it there.
All right, we'll,
We're way
water
over
group will
time.
circle back with each other and keep
And you
working.
want to report back next time?
Yep,
We'll try. I feel like we said it every time.
do our best.
All right,
Yeah,
sounds
we'll-
good. Okay, I think probably we just, can we do climate action before we adjourn?
Well, I'd
Would
love
that
to
be-
hear, so we got all of that information from James Island. I'd love to hear if that is everything you were looking for in terms of like feeling
Well,
secure and.
Yeah, let's I guess from a very high level for you all to think on, we did go back and looked at what the agreement that the city entered into, and I want to say it was 5, 6, 7 years ago. There was a pitch made to the city of instead of putting them on your roof, buy these solar panels, and they'll be professionally managed and professionally maintained, maybe in Ridgeland, somewhere in rural South Carolina. City agreed to do that. We basically are paying for those solar panels, and we are getting a credit back on our electric bill. That's happening. That's a 20-year agreement. That's underway. There would be we could either kind of say, that's enough, that's good. Nobody obviously knows about that, but it's kind of an effort that was made to have solar capacity, not directly, but kind of indirectly. The alternative would be to begin, kind of retrofitting buildings with physical. So I guess those are the two models. One has, you're supporting a farm, solar farm, and you're getting credits back. We could look at, could we further that relationship, continue that? Or the other relationship would be that we physically own things and bolt them on the facilities and have them retrofitted. Belvin reached out to the town of James Island, and it's in your packet what they provided back to us in terms of how they've approached it. But I think that is it. They've bought solar panels and are retrofitting their buildings with those panels. So I guess kind of high level, is there a desire to pursue one model over the other?
Well, so I will say that in terms of the actual energy saved, that is less consequential, I'd argue, than the leadership aspect and the visibility aspect, and be able to have like an unveiling ceremony and hopefully influencing others. And basically just the leadership effect from local government, I would argue, is the biggest reason to pursue the solar panels on the buildings themselves. And obviously there's energy savings. They will eventually pay for themselves. But I'd say the biggest factor is just the leadership and visibility. So that's why I would argue for pursuing it.
So what are we talking about, putting solar panels on this building and any of the buildings, that city
Interestingly,
buildings?
From my standpoint, the public safety building has an enormous flat roof. To me, it makes a lot of sense, but it would kind of be like putting them in Ridgeland, where I don't know that anybody would know that they were up there. So I don't know that it meets the objective. I think that it would, from a construction standpoint, I feel like that would be kind of the easiest, but again, I don't know that it achieves the objective. If the objective is to kind of show publicly your support of solar
Right.
energy, I don't know that.
I'd say it'd be maybe slightly lesser, but it'd still have a ceremony and still have like maybe a local news
I
story.
think a commitment to all the buildings.
Yeah,
This
and
building,
evaluating every
all the
building.
city buildings,
Yeah.
making that commitment, I think that would do both objectives.
Right.
Question is, money. We've got wildlife initiatives, litter initiatives, water initiatives. We as a committee are going to have to start thinking about, what's most important, because we don't want to be known as a committee that wants everything.
That's up to the
We ask
council.
for everything, we bring no money.
I do think it makes financial sense to invest in it as long-term. People are very transient, and sometimes they don't want to do it for their own private residence. But as a government municipality, this is going to be here for presumably a long
No, I
time.
agree
So
with
it only
you.
makes sense to do it. And
And I think, we can get someone to do the numbers, run the numbers, so that we can see what the numbers look like, over what time frame, what the savings are going to be, and what the importance is.
Right.
And then it can be an economic decision and a leadership decision.
All right, I have a suggestion. So the city has in their next year's fiscal year budget, I think it's $1.2 million to retrofit this building. I believe that part of that analysis will be looking at the roof, and you do hear kind of stories about panels going on they damage the roof, you then have to replace the roofs, you pull them off. So in the construction world, you do hear kind of horror stories about it. But at a minimum, we could have the designer analyze feasibility, present costs, kind of have that cost benefit analysis as part of that project and worked into that project.
That's perfect.
I think was town of James Island. I think it was around $80,000 was their upfront cost. Is that?
I believe so.
I think
I'll
that's
have it in
kind of
front of me. But
what
yeah.
I'm seeing.
That's a great idea, Douglas. I mean, I think that's the way to approach it. And, you know, because you are right. I mean, when you're going to put solar panels on your roof, you should have a structural engineer look at your roof to make sure that they're compatible, right? You just don't plop them on there. So I think that's a great vehicle, and that could tie into it, and it's programmatic. And I think it's
You
a
said
great
it's this. When is this slated for?
Next fiscal year. So the fiscal year starting July.
Gotcha.
So we're kind of, getting a list full of projects for the next year, and
idea.
that's on them.
I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
What does everybody else think?
Yes,
Makes
definitely.
You can tie,
They're
we
gonna
can
be
tie
looking
one of
at
our initiatives into an existing
Fixing the roof
initiative.
anyway or
Yeah.
replacing it.
So
think that we're
would we
looking-
still be able to get those energy credits from the solar farm?
Yes, we're doing that.
So that wouldn't
Yeah,
impact that at
That's
all.
a
Okay.
20-year, basically a 20-year agreement that we're kind of locked into.
Good.
Okay, I think Mary wanted to say
Just
a
real quick,
few
I
words
won't-
about wildlife. She promised it would be quick.
Real quick, the lease turns are back. We posted signs and roped off area just north of the Citadel Beach House. And I submitted an article to the Island Eye about explaining, so everybody would know what to do, what not to do. That'll be printed a week from tomorrow. And the other thing is, there are 21 loggerhead nests in South Carolina as of this morning, but we don't have any yet. Any night now, we're going to get one. That's it.
And then they just keep popping up, right? Once they start,
Then,
hopefully.
once they start, there's no stopping them.
So Mary, anything that the city should do in terms of putting the word out on the lease terms?
Well, the Audubon shorebird stewards are out there educating people, keeping them, trying to keep them out of there.
They're physically out there every day?
They're
and-
there now.
Okay.
And this is only temporary, and I stressed that in the article. They'll be gone by the beginning of July.
So they'll
But
be
they've
here
already
till
laid
July.
eggs,
Okay.
and we're hoping that they will all go to that one area, and we won't have to rope off more areas farther north. It
You
could
wanna-
happen.
You want to send me or Chandra, if you have her information, directly, the article?
Yeah.
And maybe we'll see if she can, because I'm sure people, I remember last year, people were kind of scratching their head about what's going on out
Yeah,
here.
it gets really hairy around the 4th of
Fourth,
July
yeah.
when they have the fireworks, and there's still some birds there.
Yeah.
So we'll
Okay.
see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we'll
I'm not
coordinate
sure I
on
have her
public-
address. I'll
Well,
send it
to
to
me.
you.
You send it to me, and we'll
Okay.
be sure she gets it.
I could probably find
publicize
her.
it.
I'll do
Okay.
that.
Great.
Good, thank you.
And I would like to revisit the conversation we started in January about using native plantings and grasses. And we never really got to get into it, but maybe if we could just put that on next month's
Okay.
agenda since the fiscal year is ending.
Here, here.
That's a great
So
idea.
Deb,
That's
you
very
have
important.
something, could you send something to Sandy and I for inclusion on the next agenda? Do you
Sure.
have kind of a cut sheet that?
Yeah,
we-
well,
okay.
it's what Mary and I put together for our goals.
Oh, okay.
Back in January, I think January. But yes, I will resend
Okay.
it
And that
as a
was more of
reminder.
an educational initiative, right? Helping people understand what the
Yeah.
species are and why
Yeah, there's
why
going to
we
be a
should put them-
program at Battery Gadsden pretty soon about that, too.
Well, I went to
On
a
Sullivan's.
Firefly event at Beidler Forest, Audubon, and it just reminded me of the importance
Yeah.
of native
Yeah,
grasses.
And
Yeah,
I've-
we're going to be redoing, good parts of our yard and anything we can
Yeah.
do to contribute to that. I'm going to camping tonight, and they were saying,
Yeah.
don't bring firewood for more than 50 miles from,
Good for you.
because of the species,
Yeah,
so.
go to
for
that
you.
program.
Okay.
Battery Gadsden.
And Douglas, I'm wondering if, with regards to litter, if maybe Linda and I could have a conversation before our next meeting and talk about the fill-a-bag and get some ideas for that.
Okay. How to get
so that we
word out.
can present next time, because I was under the impression from the information that I gathered from the website that they provided the post, that the fill-a-bag people provided the post. And then there was a requirement for the city on the back end where we had to locate the post in a certain location close to a trash can and be responsible for emptying and replacing buckets and stuff like that. And so I was not aware that they did not supply
post.
the post.
Sounds like it's just hooks and really just hooks in the badge, right? The hook and.
Yeah, based on what Natasha was telling me. And so maybe we can kind of regroup a little bit on that and report back.
Yeah, and
that's
I will
okay.
say that, in just talking with Public Works about dealing with them, they don't have the time during the summer season, and it's the person that's out on the beach as a contract employee at the locations that we talked about. So I do think this idea of finding a way to have
Volunteer?
them adopt, some kind of way to piggyback on an adoption program.
Okay.
I had a quick question about that. If we did do a really long post to get it deep enough on the beach, would the city maybe have an auger? They could at least dig the hole so that
We don't have an auger,
You
but we
don't?
do have, we have post hole digger. Yeah, we could get the post,
Yeah,
we could get
okay.
a hole in the ground.
Because that would at least help.
Yeah, yeah, they do a lot of signs with.
Sorry, why
it's
are you
all
laughing
post
at
hole
Yeah,
digger.
I was just thinking, I have a post hole digger.
Okay.
We got some strong backs over there.
We used one for the least turns. Lots of posts out there.
Yeah,
That says that, and then she looks at me.
you all may have lost your, you don't, no.
I watched.
Do we have enough to?
But I think you have too few to carry on too much.
Okay.
All right, so
Yes,
why don't we-
and just wanted to check with, you had new business, you had the sea level rise adaptation RFP.
Yes,
Was
so-
that something you needed to?
Yeah, just
Mention.
quickly, the planning commission, so we put that request out. We received 2 very good requests back. The planning commission interviewed both respondents last night, and they kind of scored them. And I'll say that both scored very well. I think the planning commission was impressed with both. So we are now entering into kind of a price negotiation phase with them. And part of their scope, though, is going to be to kind of engage with various commissions and committees, and you all specifically are on there as a point of contact for that process. So we're in the infancy stages of choosing a contractor, but as soon as we do, they'll be engaged and they'll be coming to see you. So that process
Can
is.
you say who the two
Yeah,
parties are?
Seaman Whiteside is one, and Weston Sampson is the other.
Okay.
Okay. And then with regards to our next meeting, that is going to be scheduled for Thursday, June the 8th at 4 o'clock.
Are you gone?
I am gone. Did I send you?
Yeah.
I did ask Linda if she was going to be available and if she would be able to lead the meeting.
You good with that? Just do it that way?
Um,
Hold it tight? Okay.
Yeah, I think that would be fine.
Okay.
I'm not going to be available to attend, but you guys can carry on without me, I'm sure.
Amy's also not going to be here.
Oh, no.
Is that enough reason in itself to? Are you gone just for the week?
I'm gone, yeah, I'm in Hawaii.
For just that week, though?
Yeah.
Could the rest of you move 1 week
I
to
can.
the 15th?
Wanna-
Yeah.
You want to tentatively say yes and then send an email out to us?
Yeah.
Yeah, since we're missing several of the committee
Yeah.
members, if you want to.
I think that's a good idea. Plus, it gives us an extra week because we do have some action items.
Will Amy be
we need to work
back?
on.
Amy will be back.
Amy will be back.
I've got.
We couldn't do it without you, Amy.
Okay, with that, I'll make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Second. You got it.
Everybody in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Those who left?
Hey, so if Jordan doesn't vote,
Oh.
aren't they one number short? I think they're one number short.